Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension, which is allegedly the final entry of the Paranormal Activity franchise, which I'm sure is a completely genuine statement by the producers and filmmakers, and not just a cheap marketing gimmick in order to sell a few extra tickets. A lot like, The Final Destination. That was obviously the last Final Destination movie they ever made, and Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter, which was the last of the Friday the 13th movies, if you don't count the following 8 sequels, that is. And of course, Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, which was the second final entry in that franchise. Once again, if you don't count the remake or Jason X or Freddy vs. Jason. So this franchise really did run out of steam. Like, from the very beginning, the first Paranormal Activity, people were either creeped out by it or they were utterly bored by it. I happen to be a fan, but each film became progressively worse, which was acceptable throughout maybe Paranormal Activity 3, which I thought was okay. But the fourth one was really where fans and enemies of Paranormal Activity kind of united to hate. Because by then, for detractors, they just saw the same shit done over and over again, whereas fans, they also felt the same way, except they'd add that, they had run out of ways to scare audiences. Paranormal Activity is just when things started falling flat. And the overarching storyline was just progressing way, way too slowly, so it was hard to get invested in that movie. The marked ones, in my opinion, was an improvement because I liked the characters, but I can't say it was particularly scary, and there were a lot of flaws with the script, so a lot of people did not like that one either. But I had hope because this was supposed to be the last entry. And not only that, they were going to take like an additional year in order to develop this project, and that I thought was really cool. Maybe that would give them more time to flesh out the storyline and develop new ways of scaring audiences. Maybe because this is the grand finale, they would put a lot more effort into it. And even if they're ultimately lying and they're hoping that this will sell enough tickets to where they decide to continue the franchise, you'd still think that they'd want to do their best in making a really cool movie in order to reignite the passion for Paranormal Activity. So I was optimistic. And then I heard that the name was going to be The Ghost Dimension, which just sounded so lame. And then I saw the trailer, and I was like, oh god, they fucked this up so badly. Part of me was even hoping that this was just like the third and fourth films where they just used footage that never actually appeared in the movie for the trailer, because it just looked so hokey to me, and I thought the CGI was just a mistake, and I'll explain why later on. But considering that found footage is supposed to look very authentic, CGI just sort of undermines that aspect. And then it was going to be in 3D too, and it's like, god damn it, that's even more distracting than CGI for found footage movies. So I thought it looked like shit. And then the reviews came in, and everybody was saying that it was shit. And not only, was it just shit, it was the biggest piece of shit that the franchise had yet to offer. So naturally, my expectations nosedived, and my optimism turned to cynicism. And then I saw the movie, and I was like, yeah, it is kind of shitty, but it exceeded my expectations a little bit. I think it's bad. I think The Ghost Dimension is a pretty weak Paranormal Activity flick, but I don't think it's any worse than the others. If anything, I actually prefer it more than Paranormal Activity 4, but I'd say that this is definitely inferior to 3 and the marked ones. So where do I start? Well, let's go ahead and begin with the characters. Very bland, very generic. They have absolutely no personality. If I could describe them all, I'd describe them like this. You have a father who begins to suspect that they are being haunted, so sets up all the cameras. You have the wife who is skeptical, She does not really believe they're being haunted, and she tells him that he's wasting his time. You have their kid, who starts acting very creepy and, seems to have this imaginary friend, and, throughout the course of the film becomes increasingly more unhinged and creepy. Like, you have the adult male, who I believe is the father's brother, who's kind of just helping him out. And then you have another girl, who I believe is the wife's sister, who's just sort of there. For the most part, I feel like I just described the cast of Paranormal Activity 3, except even more generic. There is nothing to these characters. I've seen this dynamic, or these dynamics done way, way too many times. So it's like the acting, it's fine for the most part, but because these characters are so dull, and I feel like I've seen them so many times, I feel like I've seen them before in other movies, that they can't make these characters interesting. And unfortunately, the little girl, she's not a very good child actress, and I don't like bullying little kids, because child actors are obviously not going to be as good as the adult actors, but I just thought her line delivery was really awkward, and whenever she's trying to be creepy, I just kind of would have to suppress a snicker because I thought it sounded so funny. I will say this, though. I did like how they all get on the same page rather quickly. They realize that they're haunted. They're being haunted. Everybody, by like the halfway point. So that was kind of new, but it wasn't enough. So that aspect of the film was shit. I did not necessarily want to see them all die, but I wasn't really interested in seeing them at all. The storyline, same shit that we've seen before for the most part. One of the problems with Paranormal Activity is, well, same thing with Saw. You feel like there's a disconnect between the overarching storyline and what the individual films want to follow. So you'd have, like in Saw, Hoffman, he'd be progressing the story, trying to capture the original Jigsaw's wife, while dodging the police. And then there'd be like a B storyline where you see some random schmuck being forced to play his game. And that's, of course, the stuff that we want to see, except it just feels like padding. And even then, the Saw franchise found a better balance, whereas with Paranormal Activity, you'd have maybe 5 minutes dedicated to the overarching storyline, and the rest is just Toby haunting whoever the victim of the day is. And this is no different. And like they do flesh out certain things, but it's like makes me wonder: did we really need to see this? Did we really need to see tapes of Katie and Christy being raised by this coven? And that's another thing too that I will say with the characters in previous movies, like the first Paranormal Activity. People bitch about Katie and Mika, but at least I can remember their names. They had characterizations. Here, I can't remember who was who or what their names were, and I just saw this movie a couple days ago. And I haven't seen the first Paranormal Activity since, I don't know, it's been a few years. Probably since the second film had come out. But, where was I? So they're trying to flesh out certain things, but I didn't really care to see that. I didn't think it was necessary. They still haven't really explained what the time travels is used for. Why does this coven or these demons need to use time travel in order to further their agenda? That seems very odd. They imply in the marked ones that the time travel just takes them to unholy places, but they don't follow through with that here. It just seems like a cheap gimmick in order to, do some fan service. Here I believe they go to the location of Paranormal Activity 3. I could be wrong about that. But it just seemed kind of underdeveloped. The motives of Toby and the Coven seem to have changed. Remember, in the previous films, it seemed like they were building up to, where they're creating a demonic army. That's how Paranormal Activity 4 ended. And the fifth one seemed to just take that, well, I don't want to say take it even further, but it furthered that that motive, because the main character is slowly, unfortunately, being recruited into this demonic army. But none of that's here. It seemed like Toby just wants to get human flesh. That is the main goal. Why? I don't know. It seems like he'd be weaker if he becomes a human, but maybe not. And maybe he's becoming the Antichrist. That's the only thing I can guess. And unfortunately, that concept loses a lot of its luster, because we saw something similar in the Vatican tapes, or at least I saw something similar in the Vatican tapes. So it's like that aspect is once again underdeveloped. You're not entirely sure that's where they're going, and I've seen it already, so it loses all of its impact. What happened to the demonic army? They never appear in this movie, including adult Katie. That bothered me so much. If this is the grand finale, you need to go all out. You need to bring in, well, at least that character. She's pretty much a staple of this franchise. She's been in all of them. In some ways, I'd say she's even more important than Toby. And for her to only be referenced as an adult once, apparently she's the one who sold the couple their house. That's just very unsatisfying. But you never see any of the other demons. I was hoping that you'd have Katie, you'd have the guy from the marked ones, all these tie-ins to the previous films, but that doesn't happen. They only reference Paranormal Activity 3. And then you have the Coven, who you see in the tapes, but they never actually appear, in the present timeline. Even when I think the story would have really benefited from their appearance. So it's, once again, for a last entry, there seems to be missing a lot of stuff, and they've made more questions than they've answered previous questions. So that bothered me. And then there were some individual parts where the characters will be stupid for the sake of the storyline. Like at one point they decide, well, we're just going to have to sleep with our daughter to make sure that nothing happens while we're in our own bed. It happens one night, and then they don't do it again. Don't know why. The priest tells them, this thing thrives off fear. The more afraid you are of it, the more power it is going to have. I believe they said something similar in the previous movies. Yeah, why do they keep fucking filming everything? It seems like if you want to strip away this demon's powers, you'll say, okay, well, we're going to destroy this camera, and we're going to get rid of the other cameras, and we're just going to pretend like it does not exist. Now, what would have been good writing is if they did this and it seemed to work, only for like the Coven to start appearing and screwing with them, which only kind of reignites the fear and gives Toby his power back. But nope. Instead, they just keep filming everything, and that just drives me insane. In terms of the scare output, there's a lot of jump scares. Some did admittedly work. Others did not. The direction was for the most part standard, though. There was nothing within the framing that I thought was particularly inspired. A few scenes are difficult to take seriously because, there's this one part, and admittedly I did laugh, and so I kind of liked it, which is better than me just not feeling anything at all. But there's this part where Toby is playing peekaboo with the adult characters, where they're hiding behind the kitchen counter, and they sort of peek their heads over to see if he's there, and then you see Toby kind of peek his head up. And I was laughing so hard, and it wasn't scary, but at least once again I was feeling something. The CGI, the appeal of Paranormal Activity is that you're taking mundane, everyday occurrences that we could relate to, and then adding sinister implications to them. So a door moves. Well, we see that all the time in real life, whether it's the air conditioning turning on, or maybe another door opens, or the wind comes in. Anything can cause the door to move on its own like that. But when you add this supernatural entity without really seeing it, it makes that creepy, because what if it is a ghost? That is where the fear comes from. But when we see that ghost, it just takes away from its presence. It takes away from its atmosphere. And that hurt the film. But on the other hand, you can't just rely on old tactics now. We've seen the door move too many times to where it's no longer really that creepy. So you almost have to show Toby now, because if you just went back, or if you just reused the previous style, you'll bore the audience even further. So it's like a double-edged sword. But I didn't think there was anything wrong with Toby's appearance, and I thought the CGI was fine. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was based on the trailers, even though it reminded me of that movie Mama too much, and I wasn't a big fan of that either for similar reasons. That part could have been worse. The finale, unfortunately, is where I felt the film totally fucked up in terms of being creepy, because at first I liked it. It actually was being kind of intense, and I liked how the characters were going on the offensive. In all the previous movies, they'd just be victims. They'd just be trying to survive. They'd just be reacting to the horror instead of actually trying to do anything about it. And so I thought that was pretty cool. These guys, they're going to try to destroy Toby. Unfortunately, this is where the 3D really ruined things for me. I saw this in 2D, but throughout most of the film, I wasn't really thinking that this was also released in 3D. I don't know how well it translated to 3D, if you chose to pay the extra few dollars to see it in the third dimension. But I only really remembered that it was a 3D experience during the finale. That's when it got really, really gimmicky. And you'll have scenes like where, a demonic arm will burst through a character's midsection and their hand will be towards the screen like that. And I'm like, okay, well, that's obviously a 3D shot. And it just looks bad when you're seeing it in 2D. It's very distracting. At times, I thought the camera work was just as awful, or the direction, I should say, not the camera work, was just as awful as something you'd see in The Pyramid. And that had some pretty awful direction. So that really took me out of the action. And the final scare was just very limp and telegraphed. There was nothing scary about it. Admittedly, this has been a problem with the previous few Paranormal Activity movies, but actually, even the marked ones had a bit of a jolt to it, a bit of a jump, whereas this one, it just that was kind of lame. And then they try to do the creepy credits thing, except they interrupt that with, or the silent credits, I should say, which is admittedly kind of creepy, and then they interrupt that with this little vignette for this other movie called The Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse. And, that film looks like it could be good, it could be funny, but it just totally takes you out of the moment, because after that vignette, then it goes back to the silent spooky credits, and I'm like, wow, movie, that was just dumb. You should have just waited until the credits were over for that. And then, they try to do that rumbling noise throughout most of it, but it's just not as creepy as it used to be, even though it's still pretty good, and I'm glad they included that. The footage itself looks way too clean, way too pristine, and it feels like a cinematographer is behind the camera. Once again, it just sort of undermines the authentic feeling that these films are supposed to, create. I thought even the old camera that's supposed to capture the spirit photography, even that just looked way too HD, considering it's supposed to be an old camera. I prefer a little bit of grit and grain within the camera work of found footage movies. I can't totally fault the filmmakers, because, the more modern the film is, of course, the more advanced the camera is going to be, so it's just a preference. I don't really hold it against the movie too much. But generally, it just kind of fell flat in terms of scares. I will say this, though, and this will be the final thing I talk about before I end this video. It was easy to watch in that it was fairly fast-paced compared to the others. They show quite a bit from the very beginning. Whereas most Paranormal Activity films, they start very slow burn and they build up to the finale, which is where it's supposed to be outright terrifying. Well, this one, it seemed more like it worked in segments. You'd have, build up to for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then you'd have a major scare, and then it would kind of start over again. And even though that makes the whole film seem a little underwhelming, it does make it just once again, it goes down really easily. I was never bored or impatient. So that's probably why I prefer it more than Paranormal Activity 4. But overall, if you like the previous films or if you just want to finish this franchise, I'd say just wait till it comes out on video on demand, which I guess is going to be like in 3 weeks, or I don't know if it's not 3 weeks, but which is going to be sooner than most films will be released for that medium. And then, or just wait till it comes out on DVD or Blu-ray. It's not worth seeing in the theaters. It doesn't really feel like it's the last entry for this franchise. And if you didn't care about the previous films and you're not interested, don't watch it at all. It's not that good. So read my written review. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I've also done written reviews of the Attack on Titan movies. My next few written reviews will be of the first 3 Halloween films. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later.